about Greg McWilliams effectively telling some of the players, it would seem, at the weekend that he was going to leave. The RFU putting out a statement yesterday afternoon to say they're now in conversation with Greg, which it would appear is now to facilitate his exit as Ireland head coach after that very disappointing Six Nations campaign.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because you would think when it was kind of leaked that, you know, RFU would come out with the information, but it was almost, by their statement, it was almost like they didn't fully know what was going on themselves. So I would imagine, now Rory might know more than this, but I would imagine that it was probably Greg's decision to go. He wasn't happy. Maybe he felt like the team hadn't performed the way he'd like to, and wanted to kind of move on. And the RFU, I suppose, we're looking at that, because normally coaching terms, I feel anyway, and I know myself, I think 3 years is a good kind of judge on how you've performed. You'll always have that first year, you'll probably always be a bit better starting out with a new coach, and then the second year you're settling. Obviously you'd still like to kick on a bit, but I thought that maybe one more year we would have really seen kind of if Greg had changed this, whether the lack of, I suppose, of attacking style or a few areas, whether that has got to do with why he might want to go, I'm not sure, because I know from my own coaching, if you spend so long working on something and you don't see any sort of kind of look from the team, you begin to kind of question how your coaching style is on this team as well.
Rory, what's the reason behind this? Is this as simple as he was hoping for a top 3 finish and it was as disappointing, or what?
I don't necessarily know if he's walked himself. I mean, as far as I know, discussions are ongoing with the RFU, and things I think will seep out as the days go on, but I think it's gone very badly. Like, performances have been really poor this year. There are mitigating factors behind it. There are, all of the stuff that we've talked about during the tournament, whether it's season structures and all that sort of stuff. There's the fact that Ireland didn't go to the World Cup and the 5 other teams at the Six Nations did. But I feel like, the fact that John McKee was put in alongside him, that suggested maybe that the RFU felt that this coaching team needed to be bulked up a little bit, that there needed to be more experience in there. McWilliams himself, I think, I got the sense that he was kind of happy enough, he would be happy enough to move on as well. Like, it's been fairly toxic the last couple of weeks. I think it's been very difficult. The timing of the Telegraph piece coming out just before the Italy game, having to deal with the questions around that, the social media stuff that followed around that as well. It's a hard job. I think it's going to be really hard to find a candidate who wants to do it, because the media attention that comes with it, because it is the Ireland national team, and more they're being treated on a fairly even footing with the men in terms of how they're covered, and rightly so. That's fine when you're winning, but if you're losing week on week on week, having loads of people dial into your press conferences or coming onto your press conferences, come to your matches, being covered live on television, it was a fairly negative doom spiral they were in during that Six Nations, and it was hard for McWilliams to get performance out of the players. And we saw some improvements as it went on in certain areas. They weren't able to fix other areas, but they didn't have he didn't have a real window to have a go at it. He obviously had that tour to Japan, which was a new thing, and they came back very positive from that. But then there was a World Cup happening elsewhere. They did no games during that. They had no build up to the Six Nations. They thought the Celtic Challenge was the way forward, was the way of doing it. But Scotland and Wales sent in dummy team, reserve teams effectively, and it didn't really stand to them at all. And by the time they felt like they were figuring it out, it was over. And now we don't even know when they're playing again, who they'll be playing again. There's talk summer internationals. They're in the WXV third tier, so they'll be playing against teams that they deserve to be playing against, because that's the place they've earned. I mean, it's very meritorious, this WXV. That's where Ireland are right now, and we can't complain about playing against Jamaica and Kazakhstan, because that's where the team are. But it's the plotting a route out of that position is going to be so difficult for whoever it is. I have a feeling they're going to go for an international candidate, someone from outside with no baggage, who come in with a fresh look at it. But look, we're a long way off that. They haven't even confirmed that McWilliams is gone yet, but it's definitely it's happening, and it's happening soon.
I would think the last few weeks of the championship for the playing group and also for the coaching group had to be quite difficult, because these issues are a lot wider than the here and now and the core group of players who are there right now. To be there where you have things like the protest that happened in Cork and the reaction to the protest around the game at Musgrave Park. When you take the Telegraph article coming out a couple of days before the Italy game, they can go up at press conference and say, we're putting this to one side and our focus is on the game at the weekend and we're trying not to pay any attention to this. But naturally that kind of negativity has to seep in.
Yeah, like there's they're doing media. They scaled it back a little bit as the competition went on, but they were at one stage at the start of the competition, they were out 4 or 5 days a week, and you come in, there's loads of other issues circling around. Like, it's the first tournament since they got contracts, and some people didn't sign contracts, so you're being asked about that. So they're always, when the men are in, they sometimes get asked about bigger picture issues, but largely all of the stuff around them is taken care of, and they're not really taken off task. You're asked about what Wales are like and you're looking forward to the weekend and what have you been up to since how's camp going, whereas the women are coming in and instantly they're being asked, and rightly so, because it's our job to ask questions, and these are the big issues. But you're being asked, why didn't you sign a contract, or why didn't she sign a contract, and why are only 4 or 5 of you on contracts? How are contracts affecting things? And look, there's also, the playing pool, is it big enough? Are the players good enough? There's other things. It's not just the media thing that you can lay on them, but I do think there was an element of, there's so much happening around them that it's very hard for them to clue into the performance at the weekend, and then the performance at the weekend is bad, so they're trying to fix the performance while also trying to deal with all the outside noise, and they're all on social media, and some of them have talked about how they came off it during the tournament because it was so negative. So I can only imagine it was a very difficult time. But any team who loses 5 from 5, even the Irish team in the 90s, the men's team in the 90s, when they were losing wooden spoons and they had no social media, I'm sure they felt like they were in a bit of a doom cycle, and it took a long time to get it. I don't think it's just about that, but they're not the youngest group, but they're a very inexperienced group. The IRFU's decision making has taken a lot of talented players out of it because they're off playing sevens as well. McWilliams decided to go without the sevens players this time, and I think it was the right decision in terms of, if you're not you're either all in or you're not in, and I do think that's the way forward. And I think after Paris there might be a bit of change there, and the sevens players may be able to focus on 15s more, and then maybe when Nucifora goes, there's more of a realisation, sorry this is going on, that the 15s will be the primary thing, but for now it's not, and the results and the performance are reflecting that, and that's again happening live on national television every Saturday. It's a very difficult place to be.
Yeah, and with that as well, guys, just like on that, at no stage, so Greg is, I suppose, and the coaching staff, the players are constantly being asked about this, and the outside noise and the Telegraph, and how are they going to sort this out, or what tournaments or what ways the AIL going to be, or where are you going to get these players? And I suppose like this might or might not have anything to do with it, but I suppose no stage did Greg's employers, the RFU, come out and give a statement and say, look, we'll talk about this after the tournament. Maybe that isn't the done thing, but I just know every press conference it was directed towards Greg, Niamh Briggs, Nicola Friday. And if they came out and said, look, we're in the process of changing this, it's not finalised, or we're looking at focusing or investing our money in these areas, there's a lot of chat about investment, and we know there's money being invested, but nobody kind of knows specifically where this money is going and how we're not seeing it. So I also think that if they came out, it might have taken a little bit of pressure off Greg, could have focused on the rugby in the tournament, and then the RFU would have been able to come in and give their structures and say, look, this is what we're doing to improve it. But at no stage did that happen throughout the whole Six Nations. Now, people might argue they don't have to do that, and I understand that, but it was kind of a new era for the women's game, and Greg was under a lot of pressure.
I think there's huge validity to that. They are... So I spoke to Kevin Potts last Thursday for an interview, and I have a big piece tomorrow with his response to the Telegraph article and the state of play and his defence of the union's running of women's rugby. And I do think that he, since he's come in, has put a big focus on it. But I did ring them the morning of the Telegraph article, and I did flag with them that, could we get something from Kevin or David Nucifora, because otherwise Greg McWilliams is going to be asked about this at the press conference, and it will dominate the build up to the Italy game. They didn't put someone forward. They have a big press conference next week on May 10th on Wednesday, where out in the HBC they're bringing out, I presume there's a couple of people at it, Gillian McDarby, the women's performance manager, is there to kind of outline their structures going forward. They are putting in centres of excellence in universities, and there are things happening beneath the surface that now people will have valid arguments whether these are the right things you're doing, but there is investment going in, and there is plans in place, and I think there are ripples beneath the surface that are certainly could bring about future success. But right now on the surface the national team is really struggling and failing, and you could argue it was being set up to fail. But Greg McWilliams is paying the price for this with his job, whether he's walking or being pushed. He's losing his job, and he's suffered I don't know how much reputational damage, but he's had to front up for a losing team on national television every week. David Nucifora, the very highly paid performance director, who is doing an excellent job on the men's side of the house, and you can quibble with some of the decisions that he made around, emerging Ireland tours and things. But world number 1 team, going to the World Cup on the back of a Grand Slam and a series win in New Zealand, having appointed Andy Farrell, a lot of great decisions on that side of the house. But he's also responsible for the women's side, and he comes out once a year and gives a press conference and kind of dismissively. He'll talk about it, and he's very well able to take a question. But there's an argument that he should be in here now, rather than me and Fiona talking about what happened.
Well, they missed all the targets in that 5-year review. Pretty much all of them.
Every one of them, and they haven't qualified for the Olympics either, which is his big thing that he's doing. So, I'm not saying sack him. I think he's gone next year anyway. He is gone next year anyway. But he should be out. I mean, part of his mandate should be to front for things like this. Like when Eddie Jones had finished 5th in the Six Nations, the RFU, Bill Sweeney was out talking about it days later and saying they're going to have a review. Even if we don't want any more reviews. I think we've had quite enough of reviews now. But Fiona's point is really, really fair. And Greg McWilliams had to go out and give a press conference and then got pilloried for elements of what he said. And look, you can argue the rights and wrongs of what he said. Players were asked about it. They're all on social media. There are people who are in positions of power who actually have more agency to change what actually needs to change, while the head coach should also be responsible for the performance of the team, and the players should be responsible for those 5 defeats. So it's a very hard sport to analyse sometimes, and we go away from the rugby so much. They never fixed their line out. They never picked Clean and Maloney. They've never really given an adequate reason why they didn't pick Clean and Maloney.
They never called her club coach, which is
that's another. These are all things that are in the ether that you could, if you were just talking about Greg or the team's performance, that you could justifiably say. But there's so many big picture stuff that the team get a pass sometimes for stuff that you got to fix your line out. You're in camp a lot. A lot of your full time players that you don't know where to lay the blame. We're not necessarily out for a blame game, but everyone wants this thing to succeed. I mean, no one wants to be like Fiona's been on TV every week talking about a losing team. I'm sure all she wants to do is have something fun to talk about.
There you go. That was but a taste of the full rugby conversation. As usual, you can get the full chat wherever you get your podcast. It's waiting for you right now.